In the quiet suburbs of Wichita, Kansas, there lived a man who appeared to be just like everyone else, a father, a husband, a church leader. But beneath the surface, Dennis Rader was hiding a horrifying secret. For over 30 years, he terrorized his community, committing some of the most brutal and calculated murders in American history. He called himself the BTK Killer: bind, torture, kill. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and grew up in Wichita. From the outside, he appeared to have a typical upbringing. But from an early age, Rader showed signs of deviant behavior. He admitted to having fantasies of binding, torturing, and controlling women, fantasies that would later spiral into reality. In 1974, Dennis Rader took his first step toward becoming the infamous BTK Killer. On January 15, 1974, the peaceful town of Wichita was shattered when 4 members of the Otero family were found brutally murdered in their home. Joseph and Julie Otero, along with their 2 children, Joseph Jr. and Josephine, were bound, tortured, and killed. This horrifying act was only the beginning of Rader's killing spree. Police were left baffled by the savagery of the crime, and the killer seemed to vanish without a trace. Months later, Dennis Rader, now calling himself BTK for bind, torture, kill, sent his first letter to the local media. He taunted the police, confessing to the Otero murders and claiming responsibility for others. These letters became a pattern, with BTK feeding off the fear and chaos he created. He enjoyed the control, both over his victims and the authorities. To his family, friends, and community, Dennis Rader appeared to be a model citizen. He was an active member of his local church and even served as the president of the congregation. He had a stable job working as a compliance officer and lived a seemingly normal suburban life. No one suspected that the friendly neighbor down the street was the elusive killer who was terrorizing Wichita. But behind closed doors, Rader meticulously planned his next killings, choosing his victims carefully, often stalking them for months before striking. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Rader continued his brutal attacks. His victims were mostly women, whom he stalked, bound, tortured, and murdered in cold blood. Each crime was more horrific than the last, and the community lived in constant fear. His gruesome acts of violence spanned over a decade, terrorizing the community of Wichita, Kansas. Rader's methodical and brutal approach to his victims is what earned him his infamous nickname. In 1977, BTK struck again, murdering Shirley Vian, a 26-year-old mother of 3. Rader broke into her home, bound her, and strangled her to death, leaving her children unharmed, but scarred by the trauma of witnessing the aftermath. Later that year, he killed Nancy Fox, another victim whom he bound and strangled in her home. What set BTK apart from many other killers was his twisted desire for recognition. Throughout the late 1970s, Rader sent taunting letters to the police and media, bragging about his crimes and giving himself the name BTK. His egotistical need for attention kept the entire community on edge. Although he continued to strike fear into Wichita, BTK's murder spree slowed in the early 1980s. However, in 1985, he killed Maureen Hedge, a neighbor, by strangling her and dumping her body in a remote area. His final known victim during this decade was Vicky Vegala in 1986, whom he also bound and strangled. Despite the mounting body count, BTK seemed to vanish into the shadows, remaining completely elusive. His ability to seamlessly blend into society, living the life of an ordinary family man, church leader, and community member, while secretly carrying out such heinous acts, only deepened the mystery and terror surrounding him. He wasn't the menacing figure people expected. He was, chillingly, the man next door. For years, his community was haunted by the chilling question, how could someone capable of such unspeakable cruelty be walking among them undetected? This relentless uncertainty, the knowledge that he could be anyone, created a shadow of fear that hung over Wichita for decades. As time went on, his arrogance grew. He wasn't just killing to satisfy some twisted desire. He wanted recognition. He craved the fear and power his anonymity gave him. It was this craving that eventually became his downfall. But for years, the identity of the BTK Killer remained a mystery, and that was what made him so terrifying. How could someone so evil hide in plain sight for so long? For years, investigators hunted for clues, but Rader's dual persona allowed him to escape suspicion. The sheer audacity of his crimes combined with his calculated restraint made him one of the most frightening figures of the 20th century. He stalked his victims with precision, choosing them carefully, and when the time came, he struck with cold-blooded efficiency. What terrified the community even more was his uncanny ability to disappear without a trace. Despite committing murders in broad daylight, entering homes, and leaving behind taunting messages, he was always one step ahead of the police. He would disappear back into his routine, returning to his quiet life as a father and church president, as though nothing had happened. Rader's downfall came in the most unexpected way: his arrogance. In 2004, after years of silence, BTK resurfaced. He sent a floppy disk to a local news station, hoping to reignite the media frenzy around his name. But this time, technology caught up with him. Police were able to trace the disk back to Dennis Rader, who had left digital fingerprints behind. On February 25, 2005, Rader was finally arrested. During his trial, Dennis Rader calmly and methodically described each of his murders in chilling detail. He expressed no remorse, recounting his crimes as though they were routine tasks. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The story of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer, serves as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can hide behind an ordinary facade. For over 3 decades, Rader's double life allowed him to evade capture, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. But in the end, justice was served, and the families of his victims found some semblance of closure. Thank you for watching this episode of True Crime Files. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And remember, evil can hide in plain sight.